Thank you for being here. It's still early for some. I'm Diego Candia-Rivera. I will talk you about brain-heart interactions at the edge. So what I mean to being at the edge. So it's typical critical care conditions that some people face. So to introduce you to this research, just to tell you, we've been trying for a few years to prove or to find biomarkers about brain-heart interaction that can be either differentiate conscious from unconscious in post-comatose patients. With the hypothesis that these interoceptive mechanisms operating within the brain-heart axis can be really relevant for consciousness. And so far, really briefly speaking, we found that heart variability and heartbeat evoked responses, so this response in the brain to individual heartbeats, provide complementary information about consciousness in post-comatose patients. So here is really a summary of what we found. So this paper, we did machine learning, but basically we built a score of consciousness based on heart rate variability and the y-axis, and based on the heartbeat evoked response. And you see in yellow-orange color the minimally conscious patients, so the patients that we believe are conscious, and in blue the vegetative state, so they believe to be unconscious. So with this two-dimensional analysis, we can see somehow cluster that higher scores in these two dimensions is likely conscious the patient. And then we have a follow-up study. This was directly quantifying the physiology, so not machine learning, and on the y-axis looking at heart rate variability, and again, and the x-axis heartbeat evoked response. We kind of somehow in this very small cohort distinguish these patients. So here you see in yellow this vegetative state, and in green the minimally conscious, and in purple the healthy. So at least in this cohort we could somehow disentangle these patient groups. So the motivation then was what happens before the post-comatose state. So during the coma and even before the coma. So we in this study, it's just a case report. So I had the opportunity to analyze a patient that in the 24 hours before dying. So the patient was in the bedside, connected to the EEG and ECG, and the patient died because of ventricular fibrillation. So ventricular fibrillation is this, typically the patient develops different patterns in the electrocardiogram that progress till the brain don't receive enough nutrients, oxygen to survive because of this chaotic electrical activity in the brain. So we did a quite simple analysis here, was just to look at what happens in classical measures of brain heart interactions at these different patterns of activity of the electrocardiogram. So here you can see the heartbeat evoked response. So during the normal sinus of the more or less normal, because the patient was still critical. So we see something like at 100 and 200 milliseconds, some positivity that was constant across different hours before the patient started to develop this tachycardia. And the main thing we found that as soon as the patient started to show these weird patterns in the electrocardiogram, the heartbeat evoked response disappeared. And this was very interesting because sometimes the patient, when they start to develop this tachycardia, sometimes they come back to the normal sinus. And even though when they had this normal sinus, the more or less normal heart, still the heartbeat evoked response was suppressed. So, well, there could be many reasons because of that. So it's just one case. We cannot really speculate. But what was also very interesting, so by looking at covariant patterns of heart rate variability and EEG power, so here you see in this colorful time series variations at different rhythms of the heart rate variability, and then at the bottom you see two epochs of varying patterns of the power, the EEG at different frequencies. And when we see here that in this case, for instance, we observe a change in the heart, and then was followed up by a change in the power in the EEG. And then here's another example that more or less happened in parallel. So we found this epochs of strong coupling by time to time during the many hours of recording. So this was just, okay, sometimes the patient has very coupled oscillations, and this motivated a follow-up study that we had many patients, and this was patients post-cardiac arrest in comatose state. So here, okay, let's see what's going on with these very coupled oscillations that we find by time to time. And we did some modeling of bidirectional interactions. I won't go into details about the model, but you can ask me afterwards if you want. But we get markers for each signal in the brain and a specific frequency. We get these 4-time varying markers of brains to parasympathetic or brain to sympathetic activity and vice versa. So this was a very large cohort, so we look at these coupled oscillations. And the main thing we found was that this coupling was associated to the severity of the patient. So how bad was the patient as measured with the state-of-the-art markers that I use in the clinical practice. So here I just showing 2. So in the clinical practice, I use somatosensory evoked potential. So if there is a somatosensory evoked potential, if the patient is somehow reacting, it's because it's not so bad. And we found that brain to heart aberrant coupling was associated with the patients that did not present these somatosensory evoked responses. And then we found here a nice correlation with the neuron-specific enolase. So this is a serum marker that the more you have in the blood is because the more severe is the patient, and this marker appears because of neural damage mainly at the brain level. So, and then here is just an example. So this is a patient who survived, so good outcome. So you see that there is some variability at brain level, heart level, and this is a time-varying estimation of the coupling. So we could say could be coupled, could not. It's kind of not easy to see. But when you see a very bad patient, you see here you have suddenly a big peak in the alpha power, and this was synchronized somehow with this peak in the heart rate variability. So typically what we found in this patient was that the most severe patients and the ones that are likely to die have these episodes of aberrant coupling, not always, and that is highly coupled, but also low complexity. So this heart rate variability looks mostly flat, and suddenly you have a peak. And then in a follow-up study, we looked at COVID patients. So we wanted to join the wave of hundreds and hundreds of COVID papers, but a little bit late. But we look at comatose patients because of COVID, severe COVID pneumonia, and we also found that different measures of brain-heart interactions were related to whether the patient would survive or not the comatose state. And differently from this other previous study, in this paper, we had the measurement, physiological measurement in 2 different states during the ICU stay. So shortly after it was admitted, so the patient sedated. And then we also measured the patients after sedation waning. So no sedation, waiting a few days and measuring again. And we found interesting results, but mainly when in the second state, whether the patient had acute or not acute encephalopathy, we had this modulation. So acute, we call in acute encephalopathy whether the patient is in comatose state, so not sleep cycle, unresponsive, or delirium. So delirium is a status of high confusion that the patient has, is believed to be unconscious, although is we rather call it an altered state of consciousness in the clinical practice. So we found that patients without this acute encephalopathy had this strong modulation after the sedation waning. So really the physiology was responding to this change in the condition. Instead, the patients who were really severe and with acute encephalopathy didn't have, the ones in red, didn't have a strong modulations in these brain-heart interactions. This is just to conclude. So far to what I've shown you here, but also other research we've done, brain-heart interactions have a strong potential in these patients. So to detect presence of consciousness, covert consciousness. So the one that is not easy, I didn't present this, but this covert consciousness we call when it's not easily to know if the patient is conscious based on behavior. Level of consciousness, severity after brain damage, prognosis after brain damage, so the mortality, And as the last thing I show you, if we can call it like this, altered states of consciousness. So this is my co-authors of these studies. I'm very thankful to them and all the institutions and funders of this. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Diego. Do we have any questions in the audience? Yeah, here.
Do you try it?
Thank you for your talk. Apologies if I missed it in the talk, but how exactly did you quantify the brain-heart interactions?
Sorry, in which?
How exactly did you quantify the brain-heart interactions?
You mean the bidirectional interaction, that part, or because we did two things: the habit of response. So it's just looking at the timing of the heartbeat and looking at what's happening in the GE between the heartbeats. So that was the starting point of looking, and then when we were looking at bidirectional interactions, it was a modeling based of how the signal could be generated. So we were disentangling the signal and see whether the different components at the brain level and heart level have some tiny difference in latency on the different peaks we find. So basically the model is capturing these covariant patterns with slight delays. Do you want more detail, or is fine?
Probably enough for now.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.
That was an awesome talk. I love how your findings branch across broad aspects of consciousness and consciousness studies. I just had a question with the cardiac brain coupling with the heart rate variability. It's really interesting that this predicts severity and basically poor outcome. But I wondered if you had a comment as to what extent that measure specifically relates to awareness, like your findings with the heart evoked potential and other aspects of heart rate variability. Do you find similar stuff with that and awareness?
So you mean like in the last studies, right? That's what you mean?
I guess from the beginning when you talked about the heart evoked.
From the beginning, okay.
Yeah, because I wondered if you applied your sort of severity measures of cardiac brain coupling to the disorders of conscious, like mainly conscious.
So by itself, heart variability is not good. It's known already that there are some papers show, we found a heart variability that could be a marker of consciousness, but then the others that shows it has poor performance. So what we've seen is that what I suspect as well is what we capture with heart variability is how bad is the patient, and then that is correlated with the probability that the patient will be aware or not. I think that's what is being captured, because it also depends a lot how you quantify this heart rate variability. Because as I showed you before, the patients don't have heart rate variability, and then they have a peak of activity, and then they don't have any more. So it really depends what method you use to quantify heart rate variability, whether this phenomenon will be captured as high or low heart rate variability. So yeah, it's really complex, and that's why there is a lot of diversity in the results in the literature. Yeah.
Okay, one more short question, if you can make it short.
So can you just tell about this pathology, the encephalopathy? Does it affect the mechanical setup of the whole system? So does it change the pressure in the brain or the intracranial pressure waves or whatever?
So I don't know if I got it. So are you asking if this can relate to like anatomical constraints, or? Yeah, actually, well, it's totally possible. So I have to say, when we did this, it was an exploratory analysis in the acute encephalopathy. We didn't have actually an hypothesis about that. Well, the hypothesis was the mortality and maybe severity. But then when we're digging into the data, we found this difference in coma. It was just coma, and then when we look, maybe there is something in delirium as well. And then we saw it, but yeah, I totally agree. It could be likely that. Yeah, is highly possible. Yeah. But I think to really know this, we need other type of data, most likely. Yeah.